After the examination of conscience, which constitute a kind of confession to oneself, I would like to speak about the confession to others. I mean to say the exposé of one's soul, which one makes to someone who may be a friend, an advisor, a guide. And this was a practice developed in several philosophical schools as the Epicurean or in the Stoican school. Another text of Seneca may also serve as an example of this practice of confession. It is the beginning of the treatise De Tranquillitate Animi. Serenus, a young friend of Seneca, comes to ask him for advice. It is very explicitly a medical consultation on his own state of soul. Why, writes Serenus to Seneca, why should I not confess to you the truth as to a doctor? I do not feel altogether ill, but nor do I feel entirely in good health. Serenus feels himself in a state of malaise, rather like on a boat which does not advance but is tossed about by the rolling of the ship. He fears to stay at sea in this condition, in view of firm land and of the virtues which remain inaccessible. In order to escape this state, Serenus therefore decides to confess the truth to Seneca. But through this confession, through this description of his own state, he asks Seneca to tell him the truth about his own state. Serenus is at the same time confessing the truth and lacking in truth. First point, he confesses the truth. He says that he wants verum fateri, to confess truth. And what is this truth, this verum? Thoughts, secret thoughts, shameful desires? Not at all. The text appears as an accumulation of relatively unimportant details. For instance, Serenus explains that he uses the earthenware inherited from his father, that he easily gets carried away when he makes public speeches, and so on and so on. But it is easy, beneath this apparent disorder, to recognize three distinct domains: that of riches, that of political life, and that of glory. To acquire riches, participate in the affairs of the city, gain public opinion, these are the three types of activity possible for a free man. The three commonplace moral questions that are asked by the major philosophical schools of the period. The framework of the exposé of Serenus is not therefore defined by the real course of his existence, nor by a theory of the soul or of its elements, but by the classification of the different types of activity which one can exercise and the ends which one can pursue. In each one of these fields, Serenus reveals his attitude by enumerating that which pleases him and that which displeases him. The expression plaquette, mi plaquette, is the leading thread of the analysis. For instance, it pleases him to do favors for his friends, it pleases him to eat simply, but the spectacle of luxury in others pleases him. He takes pleasure also to inflate his oratorical style, and so on and so on. In thus exposing what pleases him, Serenus is not seeking to reveal what are his profound desires. For him, it is a question of indicating as exactly as possible to what he is still attached and from what he is already detached. In what respect he is free and on what external things he is dependent. The verum fateri, which he proposes to himself, is not the bringing into the light of day of profound secrets. It is rather in terms of the ties which attach him to things of which he is not the master. It is a kind of inventory of freedom in the frame of a code of actions. It is not an enumeration of past thoughts. It is a balance sheet of dependencies. But we have to go further. Serenus makes this confession not only in order to expose the true state of his soul, but also to learn from Seneca the truth about himself. And now, what is this kind of truth Serenus needs and asks Seneca to tell him? A diagnosis? That is, in fact, what Serenus says. And that is what Seneca gives him. But this diagnosis does not consist in saying, here is what you are, here are the secret ills from which you suffer. Seneca contents himself with saying, do not believe that you are a sick man who cannot manage to be cured. You are a former sick man who does not realize that he has been healed. Seneca helps Serenus to situate himself on the path which should lead him to the terra firma of virtues. He establishes exactly the ship's bearings, but by itself, this diagnosis is, as you see, very short and elusive. But that's only the smallest part of what Seneca says. And the treatise De Tranquillitate Animi says much more than that. Which kind of answer does Seneca in this treatise give to the needs of Serenus? A philosophical theory? Not at all. A new exposé of moral precepts? It is clear that Serenus does not need that. Serenus has shown in his confession that he knows very well the great moral principles which are necessary for a philosophical life. The truth Serenus needs is not a complementary knowledge. It is something added to the knowledge he possesses, to the knowledge of his own state and to the knowledge of the moral precepts. This addition to what is already known is not a knowledge, it is a force which is able to transform pure knowledge and simple consciousness in a real way of living. And that is what Seneca tries to do. That is what Seneca transmits to Serenus when he uses a set of persuasive arguments, demonstration, examples, in order not to discover a still unknown truth inside of Serenus, but to explain, if I may say, to which extent truth is true. Seneca's discourse asked for an objective, not to add some theoretical principles, not to add to some theoretical principles a force of coercion coming from elsewhere. Seneca's discourse has for an objective to transform truth in a victorious, in an incoercible force. Seneca has to give place to truth as a force. Hence, several consequences. In this game between confession of Serenus and Seneca's consultation, in this game between confession and consultation, truth is not defined by correspondence to a reality, but by a force inherent to principles and which has to be developed in a discourse. 2. This truth is not something which is hidden behind or under the consciousness in the deepest and most obscure part of the soul. It is something which is in front of the individual as a point of attraction, a kind of magnetic pole which pulls him towards a goal. 3. This truth is not obtained by an analytical exploration of what is supposed to be real in the individual. This truth is obtained by rhetorical explanation of what is good for anyone who wants to approach the life of the sage. 4. The confession is not oriented towards the individualization of Serenus, of the disciple, by the discovery of personal characteristics. The confession is oriented towards the constitution of a self, which would be at the same time and without any discontinuity subject of knowledge and subject of will. 5. If the role of confession and consultation is to give place to truth as a force, it is easy to understand that self-examination has nearly the same role. We have seen that if Seneca recalls every evening his mistakes, it is to memorize the moral precepts of the conduct, and memory is nothing else than the force of the truth when it is permanently present and active in the soul. A permanent memory in the individual and in his inner discourse, a persuasive rhetorics in the master's advices, those are the aspects of truth considered as a force. Then we may conclude self-examination and confession may be in ancient philosophy considered as truth game and as important truth game. But the objective of this truth game is not to discover a secret reality inside the individual. The objective of this truth game is to make of the individual a place where truth can appear and act as a real force through the presence of memory and the efficiency of discourse. We can see that such a practice of examination and of confession remains within the framework of what the Greeks for a long time called the gnome. The term gnome designates the unity of will and knowledge. It designates also a brief piece of discourse, a sentence, a few lines, through which truth appears with all its force and encrusts itself in the soul of ordinary mortals. In the earliest form of Greek philosophy, poets and divine men told the truth to ordinary mortals through this kind of gnome, through gnomai. Gnomai, very short, very imperative, and so deeply illuminated by the poetical light that it was impossible to forget them and to avoid their power. Well, I think you can see that self-examination and confession, as you can find them, for instance, by Seneca, but also in Marcus Aurelius, Epictet, and so on. Self-examination and confession, even as late as in the 1st century after death, were still a kind of development of this gnome. So we could call gnomic self the type of self which is proposed as a model and as a target by the ancient, by the Greek and Latin philosophy, a self where the force of the truth has to be one with the form of the will. In sum, the self has to be constituted through the force of the truth. This force lays in the mnemonic aptitude of the individual and in the rhetorical quality of the master's discourse, and those depend for a part on arts of memory and arts of persuasion, so that technologies of the self in the ancient world are not linked with an art of interpretation, but with arts such as mnemotechnics and rhetorics. Self-observation, self-interpretation, self-hermeneutics won't intervene in the technology of the self before Christianity. And that's the point I'll try to explain to you tomorrow. Well, thank you.